Yeah, I think the polling that we did just last month on U.S. alliances, including Australia, but also a number of countries as well as NATO, showed a remarkable increase across all U.S. alliances. I think this is quite a remarkable trend. And when you look at polling data like this, it really makes you second guess the data. You don't really see a jump like this. And the only other time I've seen a jump like this was in the past 2 years in terms of U.S., Australian, and other views on China. So we double confirmed it. It's all accurate, and it really is quite a remarkable increase from just last year.
Just remind us again what the percentage increase was, how significant it was.
44% in 2021 thought that the alliance with Australia made the United States more secure. Then it increased by 14 points to 58% just last month.
Now, what does the polling suggest about what the US, Australian and Japanese public think about US Asia-Pacific policy?
I think right now what you're seeing is across the Indo-Pacific, US, Australia and Japan, you're seeing quite a warm embrace of alliances. And for a long time, as someone who is familiar with what Australia was like as an American in the aftermath of the Iraq War and the invasion of Iraq, there really is quite a turn in terms of how Americans are perceived and the U.S. alliance is perceived in Australia these days. I think there really is quite a resurgence of support for the alliance between the U.S. and Australia. But also, I think this is just the most remarkable and most important time in the alliance or in the relationship since World War II. Never before, in my experience and in my opinion, have I seen Australia so prominent in Washington, D.C. discussions, Washington, D.C. thinking about the region.
What were the views on the AUKUS deal and whether Australia should have nuclear-powered submarines?
Yeah, this was really fascinating because what we saw with AUKUS was we saw an announcement back in last September of last year. And we saw it was a pretty big deal with the leaders of 3 countries announcing a huge shift and arguably one of the biggest strategic decisions Australia has made in decades, if not generations. And what we saw after that, though, was not very much. And so what I thought was particularly interesting about our polling is we asked, should Australia have nuclear-powered submarines? And the plurality of Australians agreed with that, but the leading choice that Americans and Australians had, Americans and Japanese respondents had when we gave them a number of choices, including agree, disagree, I don't know, or neither agree nor disagree. The leading option chosen by American and Japanese respondents was neither agree nor disagree. To me, this tells me that folks in Japan and the United States just don't really know what AUKUS is compared to Australians who are far more familiar with it and far more supportive of it. I should note that both in America and Japan, they were more likely to support the agreement than be against it. But still, the fact that the leading choice of American and Japanese respondents was neither agree nor disagree tells me that there's a lot of communications about AUKUS that's sort of lacking.
Now, more than half of Australians surveyed say China is more harmful than helpful in Asia. What are your thoughts on this finding?
Yeah, this is something that we've seen for some time now. And it's one of those, as I said before, this is something that has been increasing for some time, this negative view of China. And it's not just Australia, it's around the world. But Pew in particular has done some pretty remarkable polling across the world, developing and developed world, and to see just how negative views of China have become. But what I found interesting is that it's bipartisan, especially in the United States, where you're seeing so much ahead of this midterm election, so much polarization and so much political anger. And it seems like Democrats and Republicans can't agree on anything. But this is something you see in Australia, in Japan, and the U.S., where they all agree that China is far more harmful than helpful in Asia. And I should note that 20% of Australians also said the United States is more harmful than helpful in Asia. So it's not like U.S. gets out of this survey thinking that they've done nothing wrong and they don't have any work to do, and they really do.
And Jared, I found this one quite interesting. Nearly 3/4 of Americans and Australians would spend $500 more on a mobile phone not made in China, despite record inflation. What does this tell us?
Yeah, this is something that we've been polling. This is the 3rd time we've polled it. And what we really want to know is, for some time, for a few years now, we've seen some negative views of China and people saying, we need to decrease investment in China. This is in the US and Australia in particular. We need to decrease investment in China. We need to decrease our economic linkages. We have to be skeptical of Chinese investment. So we thought, okay, let's see how much people actually want to pay out of their own pocket for this sort of economic decoupling. And so we thought, what is one consumer item that could potentially change with supply chain changes and with all sorts of different sort of technology and security protocols changing as we speak, really. And so we said, all right, if you have a phone made in China and not made in China, which one do you want? And 90% of Americans and Australians want a phone not made in China. And that's understandable. But then we said, what if we increase the price? And so we did a random experiment, and we broke the respondents into random groups, and we did various increments all the way up to $500. And we found that 3/4 of Americans and Australians would be willing to pay $500 or more for a phone not made in China. Again, this is just a survey, so who knows what people will be like when they're actually in the store and whether they'll actually call for that type of money. But to me, again, that shows that there really is something that the public is taking for themselves in this economic decoupling with China. And it's not just something that they want the capital cities to address, it's something that they're willing to shoulder the burden on themselves.
So many interesting findings there. We've got time for just one more aspect of it. What does the report say about support for a Ukraine model if Taiwan were to be invaded?
Yeah, this is something really surprising. We found that almost half of Australians would be open to sending troops to Taiwan to support the U.S. defend Taiwan. And whereas in the U.S. and Japan, the willingness to have troops in Taiwan, send their own troops to Taiwan, was lower at about 33% in the U.S. and 35% in Japan. But I found it really fascinating that the leading options across all three countries was basically economically isolate China and provide Taiwan with weapons. So again, as you said, this is the Ukraine model. I think we can see this happening right now, and I think a lot of folks amongst in the United States and its allies would support such a model there as well.
Jared Monshine, fascinating report there. Of course, we can find out more information. I think you've just tweeted about it, so if people want to find out more results, they can look for it there. Jared Monshine, thanks so much.
Thanks, Yvonne.